Welcome back to the Minecraft animation tutorial series using Blender 4.0. This is the last chapter of this 5-part series. If you didn't watch the previous episodes, be sure to check them out here or click the link in the description. If you watched those parts already and you followed along, well done, and let's finish the series. Now that we have our finished animation, we need to render it and then import the rendered video inside the video editor to add sound effects and music. Adding those final details is not necessary, but it makes your animation a lot better and gives it life. Now, let's go through our output settings. If you remember in the first chapter, I showed you we have different panels here. So if I click on my output properties, I can go here, and if you remember, we left this at 1920 by 1080 and we also chose 30 FPS. Here we have our start and end frames, which are correct because we adjusted them manually from here. And by the way, you can zoom in and out on the timeline using your scroll wheel. And you can move the timeline using the middle mouse drag button. And now over here we have our output settings. So in output we choose the location of where we want our file to be saved. So if I render this as an image sequence or as a video, I want to choose a separate folder. So again, I recommend to go and save this in the Minecraft animations folder. So on default it should be saved in your temporary folder, but we don't want to save this in the temporary folder, so we want to save it in a separate folder. So click on this icon and then find your Minecraft animations folder. I'm going to choose the small thumbnails here. And here, I don't have a file for the render. So what I can do is I can click on this icon to create a new folder. And I can name this tutorial animation render. Now if I double click on this, I want to name my footage over here. So I'm going to left click and name this tutorial animation. And I can press enter and then I can press accept. Now over here you notice we have this option which is PNG, and then we have this override. So what this means basically, once you render out your animation, it's going to render it in individual images. So it's going to render it like with 101 images because we have 101 frames. And that's ideal because if you're rendering, for example, and your render crashes at frame 45, then all of your previous images will be saved. But you have another option which is FFmpeg video. For example, you have a lot more options here, but you can render it as FFmpeg. Those two, like PNG and FFmpeg option, are the most common ones. So if I click on this, I can go to encoding and then I can click on this one. I can choose MPEG-4, which is basically the standard MP4 format. So if you choose FFmpeg-4, remember to choose MPEG-4 here. This time we have no audio imported, so you can choose this as no audio, and you can leave this as default. You can leave H.264, good, or you can choose high quality for the output as well. And once you hit on render, it's going to render the animation as an entire video. But what I would recommend is, especially if you're working on bigger animations, keep this at PNG. And then since we chose our folder already, our separate folder, and we have it as PNG, right now I recommend to turn off override, and then we can start rendering the animation. So what is override? Basically, for example, I'm rendering the animation and my Blender crashed at frame 20, for example, and my Blender basically turned off. If I have override turned on, and if I render my animation again, it's going to start from the beginning. It's going to overwrite the previous keyframes. But if I have override turned off and I open up my Blender file, it's going to start from frame 21, basically from the frame on which Blender crashed. So for now, keep override turned off, but in the final stage, we need to turn it on again, and you'll see why. Now, before we render our final animation, what we need to do is we need to go to this, which is the view layer, and we need to activate two passes. So click on data under passes, and then activate Z, and then activate vector as well. So make sure vector and Z are both activated. And the last thing we need to do before rendering is go to Compositing. And if you remember, we have our nodes here. So after the glare node, what we need to do is click on Shift A, search for vector. We need a vector blur. So choose vector blur, and then put this between glare and composite. And again, if you remember, you should Control Shift and then left click on vector blur to see the effects of the render. Now, vector blur will give us the motion blur effect inside our animation. So what we need to do is first, we activated these vector and Z paths. So what they basically do is they add our options here on the render layer. So if I disable vector, you can see that the vector disappears. And if I disable Z, you can see that the depth is going to disappear. So what I need to do is connect the vector into the speed of the motion blur. So I'm going to left click and drag this and then connect this to speed. And then take depth, left click and drag this and connect it to Z. So what this does basically, it gives our scene some motion blur and makes it look more realistic. So if I go and then choose an area which has some motion, like this for example, with a swinging motion, if I F12 and render this, as you can see we have some motion blur in the scene. I think it's a bit too much, so what we can do is go back to the compositing. And then under the blur panel, this is set to 1. So we can type something like 0.8 or 0.7. Let's type 0.7. And if we look, our blur is going to reduce. And as you can see, it reduced, but it still looks realistic and it has the motion blur. Now, this is the method I use to activate motion blur inside Blender. So basically, I go into the viewer layer and activate vector and Z. And then I connect motion blur and I connect vector and depth. Another method you can do is you can go to render and activate this motion blur over here. But I've had some issues in the past with it. It takes time to adjust this, and for me this looks way better. So you can use this method as well. You can look through it, but for now I recommend to use this since we already did that in compositing. And also one thing you can do if you want to blur out the background and have your character in focus, it's also easy to do. So you want to enable depth of field on the camera. So if I left click and select my camera and go inside my camera properties, I can scroll down. And then here you should be able to see the section which is called the depth of field. You can check your depth of field and extend it if you don't have it extended. Scroll down and you want to play around with distance and f-stop. So first thing I need to do is I'm going to go inside my solid view. And then by default, you should have this turned off. So when you go inside the solid view and then you click on this arrow, be sure to enable depth of field. So I'm going to left click on depth of field. And what I can do is first I can turn down the distance, and if I turn it all the way down, you can see that my image will become blurry. So what I need to do is turn it up until I see Steve and until the background is blurred out. So you can see that I'm able to see Steve and the sword, and the background and the village and the trees and the land and everything else is basically blurred out. I'm going to turn it up even more. And then f-stop basically controls the amount of blur. So if I have lower f-stop, I'm going to have a lot more blur. So if I turn this down, you can see that I have a lot of focus. So if I want to have like 1.7, for example, f-stop, then I can again play around with the distance, maybe turn this up. And then you can see I have Steve in focus, I have this section in focus, and everything else is blurred out. So if I play back my animation, we have Steve in focus. This is very basic depth of field. You can use this for now. If you want me to get into a lot of details, then I can make a separate tutorial if you want. Be sure to leave a comment down below for that. For now, you can see it even blurred out this part, it blurred out the background, and we have Steve in focus. And then adjust these sliders to your liking, just however you want. Yeah, that can work for our final animation. We have Steve more in focus. What I would recommend is you can check depth of field here, but also go to rendered view and then adjust the depth of field again, because in rendered view you can see that we have more blur. So again, scroll down, go to camera properties, scroll down and maybe increase the distance. Maybe also increase the f-stop as well. Let's go to the final frame as well, check that. Here you can see we have Steve and the sword in focus and everything else is blurred out, which can work for the final animation. And another thing I should show you about the motion blur is that when you have a camera cut, like right here, the camera jumps in front of the character or outside the character, we get like weird warping effects with the motion blur. So what we need to do is on the camera cut, like before the camera cut happens, so this is the before, this is the after. So before the camera cut, go forward, go backwards for one frame. So it's 56 here, and then we need to go to 55 frame, and then go to compositing, left click and select your motion blur. So we can extend this area, we can left click and extend this area so that we can see our timeline as well. So what we need to do is we can right click on the motion blur and press insert keyframe. Then we need to go forward, and as you can see, it created a new keyframe for the motion blur. Then we need to go forward, left click, and set this to 0. Again, go forward on the second frame of the camera cut, left click, and then left click again, because when you left click and left click out, it means you're telling Blender to set a keyframe for here as well. So we need 2 keyframes with 0. And then once we have 2 0 keyframes, go back after the camera cut. So in this case, frame 58, and then click on this and type 0.7 again. So what we did basically, before the camera cut, we set a keyframe, and on those 2 keyframes, while the camera cut happens, we set the motion blur to 0 so that we can avoid the warping effects. And then once we go forward, we are back to the 0.7 motion blur. It's not going to be noticeable in the final animation, so you can do this for every camera cut. And one last thing I would recommend is before you exit the compositor, for example, if I go to layout, I'm going to have all of these access keyframes here. So if I deselect my camera and I click on, or for example, Alt-A, I'm still going to be left with these keyframes, and I don't want that while I'm animating. So I can go back to compositing and make sure I press on Alt-A to deselect the vector blur, and all of these keyframes disappear automatically. So let's go back to the layout. So for now, what we can do is, since we already have our output and our PNG set up, we need to use this screen, not this screen, because we are not inside camera view. In this screen, we are inside camera view, and we have our overlays turned on as well. So what I can do now is go to View, go down, and then click on Viewport Render Animation. Now, we're not going to render the entire animation yet, because we need to edit the viewport render first. And I'll tell you why in a moment. So, left click on this, and then you can see that your animation is loading. So let it finish rendering. And now that it's finished rendering, I can press on Escape and go back to my view. And now if I go inside my Minecraft animations folder and go inside the renders, so this time it's tutorial animation render, you can see that I have all these individual images because we rendered it as an image sequence. And we need to import the sequence in a video editor separately. Now, Blender has its own video editor. So if we click on here and click on video editing and then video editing, you can see that we're basically greeted with the video editor. But we want to choose a separate video editor because we're going to have more options and it's going to be more versatile. But if you want, you can learn how to use Blender's video editor as well. But I'm not going to do that in this tutorial. So go back to layout and let's quickly talk about the video editors. So video editing is important if you want to get into animation. You don't have to be a pro. You have to know the basics like how to add sound and how to add music to spice things up. Now there are a lot of great video editors out there. We have things like Adobe Premiere Pro, Sony Vegas Pro, Final Cut Pro, Windows Movie Maker, and so on. But my favorite one, and which is completely free as well, is Davinci Resolve. Davinci Resolve has a free version which works really well, and it also has a paid option, and you pay only once, which is like $295 I believe, and you pay only for once and you get it for a lifetime. Now this is not a sponsored video, I just really love Davinci Resolve. I've been using it for a while and I want to teach you the basics of it so that you can also add some sounds and music and basically make your animation a lot cooler. So let's learn how to do that. So first we need to visit the Davinci Resolve website. You can click the link in the description or you can just Google Davinci Resolve. And what we need to do is click here. We can click on free download now. If you want to buy the full version, you can click here, which is the studio version. But for now, let's click on download Davinci Resolve. And now we're going to be greeted with this screen. We're going to download the default version. So if you're using Mac, Windows, Linux, it depends. I'm using Windows, so I'm going to left click on this. And then it's going to take me to this menu where I have to fill in my information. I have to fill in my name, company, if you have it, my email, and so on. This is like basic information you can fill. You can tell, it's optional, but you can tell Davinci Resolve for what you're going to use the product, but it's not required. Once you fill in your information, you're going to click on register and download. So let's download Davinci Resolve and wait. I already have it downloaded, so I'm not going to go through the entire process. The download is going to start automatically, but if it doesn't, you can click here. Now, once you finish downloading Davinci Resolve, I recommend to pin it to the taskbar and let's open it up. Now, if it's your first time opening Davinci Resolve, this is what you should see. Here I have all of my projects, but I'm not allowed to show some of them, so I'm just going to blur them out. But if you double click on this untitled project, or if you click on new project, you're going to be able to click create a new project. So click on this, and then I can name my folder tutorial animation, and you can name this whatever you want. And then we can click on create, or we can press enter. Now, we can open Davinci Resolve. I'm going to drag this from my second screen, and this is what we should see. So first, go to settings. Make sure to always go to settings, and then we can keep this 1920 by 1080, but we need to keep the timeline frame rate to 30. So change this to 30 because we also had it 30 in Blender. And now save the project settings. And also, before you do anything else, let me explain what these panels are. So we have the media panel over here. Then we have the cut panel where we can cut the footage. We have the editing panel over here. And I use editing panel like most of the time. You don't have to know all of these panels for now. Then we have this fusion tab where you can create like cool effects and motion graphics and a lot more stuff. You have the color tab where you can do color correction. We have the far light tab where you can adjust the audio. And then we have the output tab where you basically output your video and then render it. But first, let's go to the media panel before we do anything else. So left click on the media panel, click on these three dots, go to frame display mode, and make sure it's set to sequence. By default, you might have it to auto, but make sure it's set to sequence. And now what we can do is we can left click on this editing panel, and then we're going to be greeted with this menu. For you, this might be different. For you might have two screens over here, but that's fine as well. The main thing is you should see a timeline over here, and then we're going to be able to drag and drop our media inside the timeline. So I can open my Minecraft animations folder, and I have my tutorial animation render over here. And since we rendered this as a render sequence, and since we enabled the sequence in the Davinci Resolve editor as well, what I can do is, if I select the first image in my folder, click on Ctrl A to select everything, I can left click and drag this and drop this over here. And if I go all the way to the left side, you can see the footage disappears. So make sure it's in front of this cursor, which is this orange line. So we just dragged and dropped our footage inside Davinci Resolve. Now, if I want to zoom in and out on my timeline, I can use Alt and then scroll wheel. So Alt, zoom in and zoom out. Alt, zoom in and zoom out. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit over here. And then you can use this to play back your footage. And as you can see, we have our footage in 30 FPS. But I can also use spacebar. So use spacebar in Blender as well, so that's going to be easy to remember. Now I can move my timeline with left click, just the way I move in Blender. So I can use this upper section or upper portion of this area, and then I can move my cursor. But let's press on spacebar and play back our footage. And as you can see, we're able to play back our footage. Now we want to add some music and sound effects to this animation, right? So what you can do is you can go to the YouTube audio library. YouTube audio library provides a lot of free music, but if you want to go for paid subscription and if you can afford, you can use services like Audio, Artlist, Envato Elements, or there's Epidemic Sound and a lot more options as well. But if you're just beginning and you want to use the free version, which I'm using as well, you can use the YouTube audio library. So if you go into YouTube Studio, you can go to the audio library, but you can just simply Google YouTube audio library. And then you're going to be greeted with this screen. So what I can do is, if I click on this filter, I can just filter different genres and modes. First thing I recommend is click on attribution not required. So when you click on this, all of this music here, you can just use in your YouTube videos without having to credit the artist. You can credit the artist, but it's not going to be required. If you choose the second option, then you're going to have to credit the artist. For example, if I click here and attribution required, I'm going to get different music. And it's going to have this attribution. It's Creative Commons Attribution 4.0. And make sure to review the details if you're going to use this. But if you don't want to read all this for now, I recommend to choose like attribution not required so that you can use royalty-free music without having to credit the artist. Now, if I click on this filter again, I can choose different genres. And let's click on genre, for example. And let's choose something like classical, cinematic. You can choose rock as well. And you can choose all of these options, or you can choose only one option. It's up to you. I'm going to try to choose from these options, and I'm going to click on apply. And I'm going to click on this again. I'm going to click on filter and then mood. So let's choose some mood. For example, I want angry, dark, dramatic. You can choose inspirational, and you can choose other moods as well. If I click on apply, I'm going to get all of these music, and I have pages of music. For example, I can go to the next page and so on. But first, let's try to find some music from the first page. Now I'm going to go through them, and if you choose whichever music you like, and I'm going to come back really quickly. Alright, for example, there's this track called Final Girl by Jeremy Blake. And if I want to use this track, I can click on download. And then what I would recommend, once you download this, drag and drop this inside your Minecraft animations folder. So if I go inside my Minecraft animations folder, I have a separate track for music and sounds. So I can just drag and drop this into my music and sounds. So basically I can go inside my downloads folder and then drag and drop this music we just downloaded over here. Now we also want a few whoosh sound effects. Though, for example, when the character swings the arm, swings the sword, we can have like sound effects like whoosh and then whoosh. And I'm gonna leave the whoosh sound effects in the description. You can download them, but you can also manually Google them and search in YouTube for different sound effects. So I already have whoosh sound effects downloaded, and I'm gonna have them inside my Minecraft animations folder. I'm gonna drag and drop them to be organized. So now what I can do is go back to Davinci Resolve and then open up this folder again. And since I showed you how to download music from YouTube library and how to set up your sound effects, I'm gonna have everything organized in one folder, in music and sounds, and the link for that, the download link for that will be in the description. So first, let's drag and drop our music to our timeline. So what I can do is select this, left click, and drag this over here. So make sure it's dragged in the beginning, and it's gonna create this new audio channel, audio track. So if I play back my animation, you can hear that we have some music. And then it basically goes on because it's like 2 minutes, I believe. So yeah, I think I like this part. So what I can do is if I alt and zoom out, you can see that my track goes all the way up. So there are two ways I can minimize my track. One way is if I zoom in towards the end, then I can choose the blade tool, or the shortcut is B. So if I click and choose this, I can click here on this line, and then it's basically gonna cut my track. So if I go back to the selection mode, I can select this track by left clicking, and then as you can see, my clip has now 2 parts and it's basically cut into 2 parts. So if I want to delete this part, I can right click and then click on cut. Basically I remove this whole portion which we're not gonna need. So if I play back my animation again, you can see that we have a sound. And again, let's undo my actions because I want to show you another way of minimizing the track. So undo again is Control Z. And now I have the whole track again. So another way you can do is have your cursor over to the end of this track. So make sure you have this magnet enabled, which is snapping. So I'm going to snap it to the end of this clip, and I can click and drag this last section of the audio file. So if I click and drag this, then I can minimize this as well without having to cut the footage. But I think it's important to know the blade tool as well, because you might want to cut some footage in the future. So again, if I play back my animation, we have some sound and music. Now what I can do is add a fade in and fade out effect. So basically when the music stops, I want the music to stop slowly. I want the music to fade away. Not stop suddenly, but stop like slowly. So if I go to this corner, you can see that this white button appears. So if I left click and drag this corner on the left side, and then play back, you can see that the music slowly stops. It basically fades away. Now I can do the same for my clip. Again, go to the corner, left click and drag this, and let's watch. You can see that the clip slowly fades away. And then we can do this for the beginning as well. So if I go back, I can go to the corner, I can hover over the corner, left click drag, and then do the same for the music, left click and drag, and let's see. Yeah, we have a small fade in the beginning, and a fade out in the end. So that's pretty cool. We can keep this way. And also in the folder which you're going to download, or you can download manually, you're going to have some whoosh sound effects. So we're going to add some whoosh sound effects. So let's see. We need one whoosh here where he swings the sword, another whoosh here, then third one is going to be this one where Steve basically moves his sword forward, and the last one is going to be here. And also, since our winking motion has a small head movement, we can add a whoosh sound effect here. So let's try to add them. Let's move my cursor over to the first whoosh. So we want to add the first whoosh here. So this is going to be an audio track for the music, and we're going to create a second track for the sound effects. So if I open up my folder again, and if I, for example, choose whoosh 3, I can left click and drag whoosh 3 below the music. Make sure not to drag this here, but drag it below the music. And then it's going to create another audio file. Now if I play back my animation, we can hear the whoosh sound effect. If you cannot hear the whoosh sound effect, what you can do is left click on the music, and then you can use these sliders over here, and you can turn on the volume, or you can turn down the volume from the effects as well. So if I click on volume slider and drag this down, I can drag this down this way, or I can use this slider to drag this up and down as well. And this slider is usually more accurate, so I can left click and drag this down or up. I'm going to keep this at minus like 10, for example, and let's play back. I think it's way too low, so I can just Control Z, keep it at minus, let's keep it at minus 1.74, for example, and let's play back. So now I can hear the music and the whoosh as well. So we added first whoosh, let's add a second whoosh, and basically we can do the same thing. So go here and drag and drop any whoosh you want. For example, I'm going to drag and drop whoosh 4, and then let's play back. Yeah, we have a whoosh here as well. So whoosh whoosh, yeah. And then I want a whoosh here as well, when he brings the sword forward, and let's see. Drag and drop the whoosh 5, for example. Now, I don't really like the whoosh 5, but I can replace it later. So let's move forward, and then over here, I want another whoosh. So let's choose whoosh 1, for example. Left click and drag. Now, as you can see, the whoosh happens a bit later, so we can bring it back by left clicking and dragging it. And then on the last section, I can use another whoosh, like basically when he winks over here, I can use a small whoosh. I think whoosh 2 is like a small volume one. So let's see. Yeah. So it has a low volume, but I think it's happening a bit late. So I'm going to drag and drop this over here on the back. And now it happens on the proper time. So if I want to replace my whoosh 5, what I can do is basically go to whoosh 6 and drag and drop this over on whoosh 5. And as you can see, it overlapped the whoosh 5 and it left a small portion here. And I can just right click and cut this. And I'm left with a new whoosh, which is wave 6. So yeah, let's play back our animation and see how it is with the music and sound effects. I think it's good, but I think here it needs to happen sooner, this whoosh, or here needs to happen sooner. So again, drag and drop this. And this needs to happen sooner as well. And the way you know when the sound effect starts is basically you have this white waves where your way can basically tell which sound starts where. So this is the sound, and we can tell that over here we don't have any sound. So you can match the movement with these white lines, with these white waves. They're called like sound waves, I believe. So let's hear again how the animation looks like and how the animation sounds. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, I think we're pretty much done. Now all we need to do is choose the in and out points. So we're going to tell Davinci Resolve which portions to edit. So go to the first frame over here and then click on I, and it's going to set the in frame. Now go to the last frame. So the last frame, I'm going to zoom in. It's not this, but it's this. So as you can see, the music ends a bit later than the clip. So go here where the timeline ends, where the clip ends, and then click on O. So I is for in, O is for out. You can remember this by in and out. It's pretty easy. So in and out. But if you cannot remember the shortcuts, you can just use the slider. But using the shortcuts is a lot faster. So now we chose in and out points, and now we're ready to render. But what we have left is, if you remember, this is not a fully rendered animation. There are no shadows, there are no effects. So since we already edited our footage using the draft render, now we can render the animation. If we imported the rendered animation straight away over here, then our footage might not have played back, because when the animation is rendered, the video editor has a hard time playing it back in real time. But if I play back this animation, it's visible and there are no problems. So what we can do right now is go to Blender. So make sure you Control S and make sure you save the projects by clicking Control S. I believe Davinci Resolve has the autosave option, but still, it's good to get into the habit of like saving animation and saving the project and clicking Control S. So I just turned my volume all the way up and realized the animation might be a bit too loud. And if that's the case, what you can do is go to Far Light. And then here you can manually adjust Audio 1 and Audio 2. Audio 1 has your music, Audio 2 has your sound effects, as you remember. But if you want to adjust both of them, you can just use the slider, which basically adjusts every audio channel at the same time. So if I left click and drag this, it's basically the final volume of how everything will sound. So if I left click and drag this down, I just turn down my volume. And that might be enough. I can turn on the sound effects as well because I think they're too loud, so I can click on audio too, left click and drag the slider down, and let's see. And I can turn on the music as well, and let's see. Should be fine right now. Turn up the sounds, and let's see. Yeah, I think now we're good to go. So the last things we need to do is we need to render the full animation in Blender, and we need to render the animation in Davinci Resolve Video Editor as well. So let's go back to Blender. Let's open up Blender, and here we have our project. So there's one last step we need to take. Is basically we already set the output, and right now we need to turn on overwrite. If I click on this and if I render the animation, it's going to render the animation again, but in the same folder. It's going to overwrite the same folder, and once we open Davinci Resolve, we're going to see the rendered file here. We have this imported, but if we overwrite this, we're still going to be able to see the rendered footage over here. And you'll see what I mean in a few minutes if you don't understand. So go to Blender. Now the very last thing we need to do is turn on motion blur, because motion blur makes things more realistic. So, and also we have our output set. So now we are ready to start rendering the animation. So again, go back to output and make sure you have overwrite turned on. Now, if you saw, when we tested motion blur, each image took 13 to 14 seconds to render. Now we have our animation, which is 101 frames, which is a little more than 3 seconds. So again, if I click on view and show seconds, I get like 3.11 seconds. So 3-second animation is very short and it's easy to render. But if you're working on large animations, like in the future when you start working on like 2, 3, 5 or even 10-minute animations or even more, then you're going to want to render your animations overnight, for example, because they're going to take a long time to render. In this case, it might take a few seconds or even a few hours. But when you're working on large animations, you want to make sure that you have everything outputted properly, every setting is correct, so that you don't have to re-render like large scenes. So again, let's go back to the frames and make sure your output is set properly and make sure you have overwrite. And what I can do now is I can Control S, obviously, to save the file. But here, if I go to render, and then I click on render animation or Control F12, which is a shortcut, I can click on this and my animation is gonna start rendering. And as you can see, each frame takes 13 to 14 seconds to render. But while my animation is rendering, I can go back to Davinci Resolve, and if I play back the first frames, you can see that they're overwritten. So if I turn off this fade in or fade out, and if I play back my animation, you can see that since the overwrite is turned on, my animation is being rendered. And I have the lighting and all the effects. And if I wait for the entire animation to finish, it's going to go all the way and it's going to be rendered all the way. So I'm going to come back once this is done, and then we're going to export our animation from Davinci, and we're going to be done with this tutorial. So once we're happy with the animation, once we're happy with the video and the sound effects and everything else, what we need to do is, again, we need to choose the in and out points. So click on I here, then go to the last frame, and then click on O so that we can choose the in and out points. Now go to deliver, and then right here you have different presets to choose from. We have a lot of presets over here, but what I would recommend is you choose YouTube 1080p because that's the most standard one. And as you can see, you get 1920 by 1080 and we get 30 FPS, which is exactly what we want, H.264 format and so on. The last thing you need to do is browse, and then you basically choose an output for your final video. So I recommend this to save this to Minecraft animations folder. So again, and inside my Minecraft animations folder, I'm gonna create a new folder and call it something like final or finished videos. I can double click on it and name this video something like tutorial animation, and you can name this whatever you want. Now, once you've chosen output, the last thing you need to do is click on add to render queue, and then click on render all, and it's going to start rendering. And usually it renders pretty fast, a lot faster than Blender, and as you can see, for me it just took a few seconds. So if I open the video, if I find my Minecraft animations folder and go to finished videos, and I play this, as you can see, we have our finished animation with all the sound and music. And well done, congratulations, you just finished your very first Minecraft animation. To summarize the series, we learned the basics of Blender and navigation. We learned how to move, create and delete objects. We imported our Minecraft world and the character inside Blender. we added lighting and did some compositing, and we added a little bit of effects as well, like motion blur, depth of field, and glare. Then we learned animation and rendering, and we finally learned the basic video editing as well. And now after watching this series and following everything, you will be ready to start creating your own Minecraft animations. Now this is a great start, and you can watch this tutorial again, you can take notes, you can give it your own twist, you can do stuff without watching the tutorial to remember it better, and so on. And also, my advice would be to first practice, make a lot of animations and experiment, and you don't have to write a story for every animation. You can just take a character and think of some movement you want to do. In that process, you will learn a lot and come across some problems and come up with solutions. And that's a great way to learn Blender and animation. And 2, watch a lot of action movies, TV shows, cartoons, and anime, and absorb how characters move, like how they do default movements, how they do fight scenes, and a lot of stuff. And you can get cool ideas for your next animations as well. Also, I highly recommend checking out this video, which is called 12 Principles of Animation by Alan Becker. It explains the 12 main principles of animation, which was developed by Disney. And 3, watching tutorials is great, but you should try to replicate the stuff you learn in the tutorials by yourself. You shouldn't always watch tutorials. It's okay to watch them for a few times, but if you always watch tutorials, you're gonna get stuck in the tutorial loop, and then once you open Blender, you won't be able to create anything yourself. It's hard, but I recommend to sit down and then try doing stuff yourself, remembering stuff, and then you can take notes as well, and so on. Also, making mistakes is fine. Also, it's fine if you don't understand everything, feel free to leave a comment down below. And yeah, just practice, apply the stuff you learn, and you're gonna get better. So that's it for this tutorial series. I will upload more Blender and Minecraft related tutorials every week. So if you want to see them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notifications. Also, if you want to support the channel and get cool rewards, feel free to check out my Patreon. Also, click here if you want to know how to make smooth animations, and I'll see you there.